The resilience that Keith Haring showed throughout his formative years. As an example, there was a particular college he wanted to study at, but he couldn't get in, didn't have the money. So he worked as a janitor in that college, cleaning toilets, taking out the trash, and taking classes in semiotics. Woo. Like, I think that kind of thinking now, when no one's handing you nothing, no one. Keith Haring would be somebody good to keep in their sights. Like, oh, he was unstoppable. Yes. How many dishwashing jobs did he take to keep things moving and to pay the rent, pay his expenses and buy art supplies? And I found all that very inspiring, and I relate to it because at my generation, we were like that, working class kids who wanted to be part of the swinging, groovy situation that's unfolding.
Simon Doonan is a living fashion legend and is widely known for his work as the creative mastermind behind the iconic window displays at Barney's. Over the course of his career, Simon wrote a style column for Slate Magazine, made several TV appearances, and landed a new role as a judge on NBC's Making It. He is also the author of several books, including a new book released this week, Keith Haring, one of the first books in the Lives of Artists series. It's a must-read. The book is an inspirational and magical experience transporting the reader into the golden era of art and fashion in New York City, full of so much creativity, but equally full of crisis and obstacles through the lens of someone who was there. I hope that you enjoy my conversation with fashion icon and author Simon Doonan. Also, please don't forget to subscribe, review, and tell us what you think of the show. You can also support the podcast by having a fashion moment with our exclusive t-shirt and mug available at afashionmoment.com/shop. Now, on to the show. Simon Doonan, welcome to A Fashion Moment. I am thrilled to have you here. You look amazing, as always. Just for our audience who may not know who you are, I mean, obviously, I know who you are and lots of industry people know who you are, but, we have listeners all over the country and the world who may not be familiar with your work. But just to give a quick rundown, you're obviously an iconic window dresser. Garnered your notoriety at Barney's. The windows, amazing, iconic. I mean, you've won almost every fashion award there is, especially the coveted CFDA award. You are the author of several books, and obviously the newly released book about Keith Haring and his amazing life, but also, drag, the complete story and how to be yourself, life-changing advice from a reckless contrarian, and much more. I mean, there's so many. Honestly, I don't know how in the world do you churn out all of these amazing books? Like, seriously. I mean, and they're so well written and so thoughtful. I mean, I'm just blown away. I said, Winston Churchill is knocked to the side. You're actually like above in my mind, because you give the wit and then you give the history and then you also provide, context into what's happening.
Oh, well, I think the short answer to that is for so many decades, I had this job, like this intense corporate job at Barney's. And, it was old school. We had to be there at 8 a.m. and then the store closed at 9 p.m. It was like my life. And I did very well in that environment and I had a lot of success there. But when I left, when it ended, I had all this time on my hands and I was used to being busy all day. So writing is an incredible outlet for me. it's like uses up all this time. Otherwise, I don't know, I'd probably be like a crystal meth addict or something, or I'd have gone insane. I obsessively need stuff to chew on every day. So books, writing takes forever. Writing is rewriting. So I'm just supremely grateful to have these book projects that come along, and I can focus on them obsessively and chew on them and get into the research and all that stuff.
I love it. I'm chewing, Simon. I'm like, I want more to chew. I'm like, okay, we have one this month. Are we getting another one next month? So I'm thrilled. And also, we love you on NBC's Making It, an amazing show. You're a judge on that show. How in the world did that come to be? Like, where'd they find
it's kind of a funny, it's kind of a funny story. My husband, Jonathan Adler, and we both were called to audition for that show. And so suddenly in our house, it's like Betty Davis and Joan Crawford.
Oh my goodness.
Huge. And he was very confident that he would get it because it's a show about craft. And, I was making giant poodles out of feather dusters and stuff like that. But he actually is a craftsman making pottery, and like he deals with craft. So he was like, don't worry, it's fun to do auditions, and he was already like planning his on-camera outfits. And then, the phone call came and I got it. It was so hilarious. And I continue to rub his nose in it to this very day and taunt him.
I love it.
About being on a network show.
Huh. How about that?
I'm sorry, Emmy-nominated network show.
Yes, we got to add that in there. We've got to add that in there.
So but it's really fun. I thought, well, this is my reward for all those years and years and years of being up all night doing window display with glue guns. I get to now be like, Simon Cowell on these crafts. But Amy Poehler and Nick Offerman, they like it to be a very warm, positive show, which I think that's why it's a hit. People want a bit of positivity.
Yes.
And it's so fun to do. We just shot the third series in October during lockdown.
Dana was like, we're going out, we're going to be masked up, everybody's socially distant. So I'm curious to just see how it all came together. I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, thank God for Dana, because she's the other expert judge, and she is we go hiking together, we eat meals together, because we're, especially in the lockdown situation, and her incredible husband, Ryan, who's an actor, we all went hiking, we went to Forest Lawn Cemetery, we're so desperate for things. These are like on our days off, Saturday, Sunday. If ever you're in LA, go to the cemeteries. It's really fun, and you get to see Betty Davis's grave and Carrie Fisher, and maybe it's that morbid.
No, oh my gosh, I find it interesting. I'm actually like, okay, like I wonder what her tombstone looks like. I may have to look that up. What are we talking
it's mega.
Here?
Mega.
Oh, okay, yes, on my list.
And Dana is such a genius. She's so interesting because through Etsy, as I'm sure you realize talking to her, she has access to this incredible, she can really see what's trending, what's not, because she's looking at the vast Etsy data. Yeah. So I'll say, I love unicorns. And she'll say, very last year, darling, because she can see what's coming and going. And so it's so fun for me to work with her.
You're staying on the pulse. You're staying on the pulse. I mean, you have so much.
She calls me Granny. Did she tell you my nickname?
No,
Granny?
Never.
Granny can never find her glasses. Granny's always late.
Well, you're the chicest Granny I've ever met.
Well, when you tell her, like, Simon Doonan was 7 minutes late because he totally spaced. And she's like, that's my Granny.
I have to delve into this book that I got lost in the 80s. I got lost in your world, the club scene. I mean, you're name dropping here and there, like with the clubs. I'm like, oh my God, like who knew there were so many clubs in New York and what was going, it was before my time. So it was such an in-depth history lesson, not only on, Keith's life, but also what was happening in New York. So I want to circle back and go back to, why did you do this particular biography? Why did you start with this one?
Well, the publisher offered me the project, Lawrence King, but I had to seriously think about why Keith Haring, why now?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're writing about something that's not going to get any traction with people. So you have to think about why now? And so I thought about it and I read a lot of stuff. I read his journals and I thought, oh yeah, I see why now. Because when Keith Haring became prominent in the 80s, he really pushed a kind of activist, socially conscious art for the people. He said it, I want to make art for the people. He said, the people never get the art they deserve. They're always getting this weird stuff that they never understand. Like abstract art, most of the population doesn't even get it. But he wanted to make art that communicated. So you get Crack is Whack, you get Free South Africa, you get safe sex messages about AIDS. His art is infused with social justice messages. And so then going into he died early, at the end of the 80s, early 90s. So then after that, the art world got very sensational, shocking. You have artists like Damien Hirst and you have artists like, Jeff Koons, and their goal was to create kind of these incredibly shocking installations that maybe were hugely expensive. It wasn't really art for the people in the way that, Banksy is or Keith Haring is communicative art for people. So I feel like now, we've gotten through the 90s and the noughts, and we're in a moment where social justice art is hugely focal. So I think that's why Keith Haring has resonance now, because he is that person. He wanted to communicate messages that were relevant to people, all colors, all races. He was an inclusive guy. And, that's why I thought, oh, great, got it.
Absolutely.
Now that's why Keith Haring by now.
And he would be considered a major artist in the Expressionism movement. Like, how would you describe that to folks who aren't necessarily a part of the art world? Like, how would you describe his method of art?
I would say it came out of the graffiti movement, graffiti world. There probably is a fancy term for it, but it doesn't spring to mind.
Yeah.
But he definitely came out of that. He was a defacer, like the graffiti guys who changed the subway system with their incredible artwork. And, when Keith Haring came along, that was considered a blight.
Wow.
All the Mayor Koch was trying to get it off the subways. People couldn't believe it was just everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was considered a blight. And Keith Haring, by doing his defacing campaigns in the subway, people started to see, oh no, this is actually, love it or hate it, it's art. It's incredible. It's this intense language with its own styles and ideas.
Oh, he was going into some really interesting symbols. You have the barking dog, you have the baby, and I love how you sort of go into the details of his earlier life and just how much he loved kids and children and the innocence, and sort of, picking up that children sort of have this intuition and ability to sort of connect with energy, and really sort of taking that to heart through some of his symbolism and art, which I thought was fascinating, because I was just it's a figure with energy or something. I didn't know what it was. So it was really great to sort of see that breakdown in his life and where the symbol sort of came from, and the sexuality as well.
Yeah, well, he his dad was a very skilled cartoonist, not professionally, but he loved to draw, and Keith grew up drawing cartoons and grew up watching cartoons. So he was in that pop mentality of cartoons, and I guess they're called pictograms. That's the typical word for it. He created this language of pictograms that you could see. The radiant baby, the flying saucer, the man with the hole in his stomach, the leaping dogs. They, like, you're smiling now because they're kind of great. They're adorable, and you get it right away when you see them. You don't have to read about it. As I say, he knew how to communicate directly to people in the way that cartoons do. And so, he's part of that cartoon graffiti. Like Kenny Sharp.
Yes. Oh my God, that relationship between the two of them. I mean, honestly, how did you discover all of these personal details? Were they sort of like highlighted in his diary and his writings? Like, I know that you also mention some of the other artist journals. I mean, where did you get this?
Well, what I did was basically, I guess I read about 5 books total, and I researched a million articles on the Haring Foundation website. There's great stuff on there. And what happens after a while, because I wrote that column for the New York Observer for 10 years, and then I wrote for Slate for 5 years, you start to get in the habit. I'm sure you understand this, where things jump out.
Yes.
Okay. So you hear, Keith Haring lived opposite the club bars, the sleazy steamboat. Well, like that. Certain things just are more interesting rather than, I don't think anyone cares which high school he went to, but they do care that the fact that when he was delivering newspapers, he would stop off and masturbate all the time in every public.
Yeah, that was so. I mean, the word rake would come up so much in the rake, but then also words like democratization and just sort of these themes that also jumped out as you were telling his story. So it's.
He's so honest. Like, I really appreciated his honesty, because now I think there's a tendency people to want people to see themselves as paragons.
Yes.
He doesn't do that. He's like, I was horrible to my first girlfriend. I deceived her. We had fights. We had physical fights. He's just honest. Yeah. And he's a flawed guy who ultimately the aggregate is very sweet and appealing and real.
Absolutely.
So that's much appreciated. I think when you're reading about somebody that they're just like, give it to you, warts and all. Here's the stuff really effed up, and here's the stuff. That's what people want.
It was so honest. It was so honest. And I really appreciate that in the writing. Another thing that, sort of jumped out at me just as, an African-American was his relationship with Basquiat. And sort of that, they were friends, but, that initial sort of tension, like, hey, this artist is getting recognition and I'm not. And so I really appreciate you sort of, just making that known that, hey, Basquiat, as an African-American artist, felt that tension as Haring was sort of getting this attention and acclaim, and just the idea of art for everyone.
Basquiat, I can imagine, and I remember him. He quite well. He dated a lot of girls that I knew, and he was very popular with women. Before I came to live in New York, I worked in a store in LA, and Basquiat had his first exhibit at the Gagosian Gallery in LA. And he came into this store where I was working, and I'd never seen him before. And I thought, wow, talk about charisma. He had his hair, and he was with Larry Gagosian. So I figured he's an artist or a musician. He reminded me of Terence Trent D'Arby.
Oh, wow.
Remember him?
Yes.
Very, very cool, very good looking. And he bought this Comme des Garçons suit.
Of course he would.
A gray one, just plain gray, almost like a prison uniform, almost like plain gray suit, very classic. And then the next day he came back, and the suit, it looked like he'd done 8 paintings and wiped his brushes all over the suit. It was completely covered in paint.
Wow.
And it looked insanely groovy. And he just bought another suit.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
And I was mesmerized with him, but I think he felt very outside, as the one. There were plenty of guys of color in the graffiti movement, but he wanted to be a gallery artist, an artist, like Kenny and Scharf. And so I think he probably, some of his, his attitude came from feeling outside of that. And Keith Haring, to his credit, when Basquiat wanted to come to the School of Visual Arts,
yes,
Keith Haring said, "Oh, come in," and like his security card and got him in. And then Basquiat started tagging.
I love it.
Cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love that friendship, and I love just Haring's inclusivity. I just really felt that throughout the story that you told. And I loved it. I loved it. So I'm so glad that you were, and it seemed like, even with LA2, how he brought LA2 sort of like under his wing and working with, the Black and brown kids of New York, I just thought that was so great.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great leitmotifs of his life is his relationship with, his racial inclusivity.
Yeah.
And the way he handles situations with the body painting with Bill T. Jones and Grace Jones.
Oh my goodness. Woo!
I mean, that's some of my favorite work.
Wow. I mean, mind-blowing. Yeah. I'm like, I want more. I need to watch the videos. Oh my God. Like, I just honestly, I've always been more into like the more classical forms of art. I was that gal. So I was like, impressionism, meh, like modernism, meh,
too sloppy,
and even with Picasso. I mean, I'm a personal fan of his blue period work more so than the cubism. I know, I'm like, sue me, but when you get educated and you learn more about the artist's story and the journey, like for some reason it just sort of shifts the perspective. So I'm like, okay, let me delve more into this. You see it everywhere. It's been commercialized in different ways, but his story is really great. And I want to just touch back on his earlier life, just sort of the, he gets to New York and really embraces, his sexuality, which was something that he, I was like, wait, he was like an evangelist? Like, what was going on back home? Just sort of these extremes of, okay, I'm an extreme Christian, and now I'm just gonna, let the guard off and do my thing. So it seemed like there was this sort of tension for a while internally.
Oh yeah. I think, I grew up in the 50s. Gay homosexuality was legalized when I was like 17 years old, and I was already gay. So it was illegal. My dad used to say to me, "You're going to go to jail. You're going to go to prison. You're going to get blackmailed." It was like a one-way ticket to hell.
Wow.
As
among
society.
Other things. Yeah.
But then I thought, there's another way to figure this out. If you go to the big city and become a window dresser, it could be more fun to be had. But anyway, it was. So the 70s were a period where gay people were like unleashing themselves. And that that was primarily through the avenue of sexuality. So you had this sort of huge uptick in sex clubs and steam baths, and everything was sexy. And, this is how it manifested itself. And Keith Haring was part of that. He moved into this little apartment, which is right opposite the club bars.
Oh, yeah. I was like, whoo.
Ultimately is where I'm sure he contracted HIV. And so, it was sort of biblical how it played out in some terrible way. And, that's why I think AIDS is a very complex disease. There's so much attached to it that even COVID doesn't have attached to it. There's no shame attached to COVID. But with AIDS, it's incredibly complex, and people were made to feel ashamed because they had it, and blah, blah, blah. So it was, and he navigated that with a maturity that's quite surprising. Somebody very young, but I saw that with a lot of my friends who died. They would contract AIDS, get very sick, be shunned by their families and by the, what was left of their friends, tried to help each other, but people were dying quite quickly. And no, it was a very challenging period, but to put it mildly, but it galvanized him. He became more productive, and it gave him an even more acute sense of passing time and how every moment counted, and he packed in the projects in those last couple of years.
Yeah. And, you really mapped that out sort of beautifully. You don't miss a beat there. I'm like, wow, he completed so many projects. It was almost like he knew that his time was limited and he wanted to make the biggest impact possible, which I thought was extremely great. There was one chapter that really sort of just stuck out to me. And I had to really just like sit down with it for a minute, just about like making it, the changes that happen when fame and success sort of come into play as it relates to your relationships, as it relates to your sense of, who you are, like what's happening around, like just so many changes are happening. And you sort of go into the different parts of his life. And it just made me think about like change in general in one's life. Like when you're, moving from nowhere, Pennsylvania, and now you're in New York and you're a big time artist, like, who are you? And you mentioned that one of his friends said, "Oh, we lost Keith to fame." And I thought that was just a really interesting perspective. I was wondering if you could sort of expand on that as it relates to Keith's life and what transpired after.
I think that was probably Kenny Scharf who was talking, or one of the women he lived with. Mm-hmm. They were talking about a specific period where they felt they lost him to fame. Yeah. And I think I love sports and I follow basketball.
What?
And, I love, but mostly I follow English soccer. And the Premier League, and I've written a book about it. I'm very obsessed with it. But you see, with sports figures, they hit the big time and all of their nightmares come true. And it's the terrible crux. You do this thing that you love if you're an artist or a sports person, and then you get recognition for it, and then you get a ton of recognition for it. And all of a sudden your problems are exponentially increasing. And some people are really good at handling that. Some people, but I'm not sure I would be if I became stratospherically famous and wealthy. Like, I can only imagine how complex, people's lives are. I often get, "Oh, hello, I love your windows" on the street. Or I was on those VH1 shows for so many years. A lot of people, say hi because they recognize me from I Love the 80s.
Yes.
And that's a nice level of manageable, low-key recognition where people are just like, "Hey, I know." It's very, very nice. It makes you feel happy. But then imagine the can't leave your house fame, the like paparazzi in the bushes fame, our kids have to have bodyguards because they're targets for kidnapping fame. I think it gets very complicated. And then managing people's feelings. Like once you get, Keith Haring had an entourage of people who worked with him, collaborated with him, but were also dependent on him, and he was dependent on them. And those are immensely complex relationships. I think musicians have to deal with that, and sports people. And I'm very sympathetic to that and glad I never had it.
Yeah. I don't want it ever.
I had a job for decades and my life was fairly straightforward. And you're like,
I'm good here.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that, aren't you? Like what fame does to people.
Oh, Simon, it's so interesting you would say that, because even the folks that I've interviewed for this podcast, some of them just astronomical fame at one point, in the 80s, 90s. And now it's like a different life, but it wasn't as if it didn't happen, but it just shows just how fleeting fame is and how fleeting fame can be. And just really at the core of your life, it's who are you? And, what do you define as your purpose? And then being okay with that and just living your life,
Yeah, I think it gets very complicated. And then you see someone like Basquiat get involved with drugs.
Yes.
And, like creative people are often a bit fragile and end up, trying to deal with their pain in ways like that. And then someone like Basquiat, his values now are very much higher than Keith Haring's. Like his paintings sell for many.
I know, isn't that wild?
I know, much better. Like Keith Haring can get 3 or 4 or 5 mil for a painting. Basquiat's are in the billion. It's like insane, and it's just so awful. He's not here to see it.
Yeah,
he's not here to enjoy it. No fame. Madonna's always talked a lot about it. She says she wanted it so much, but it's, brought her feelings of despair, intimate, occasionally. Not. I think she deals with it. She actually does seem very cut out for it, dealing with a complex life.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's not always. I'm sure she has admitted there were moments of complete despair, and but I guess most of the time she's on top of it.
She's amazing.
And then what about her relationship with Keith Haring?
I know. Well, so I was like, oh my God, they all hung out together. And then you are so funny. You're like, they like the same guys. And I thought that was so funny. It's just like they have the same taste in men. Of course they're going to like hang out together.
Yeah. And that was a quote from both of them. Publicly acknowledged that's not something I came up with. They both said it. Yeah. No, like Jelly Bean Benitez.
Oh my goodness. I had to look him up, Simon. I was like, a young Jelly Bean. He was gorgeous.
And talented and very pivotal in creating house music. It's, part of that revolution. Yeah.
It was amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. And they also shared that sense that they weren't taken seriously because they were popular, which is like an interesting thing if you think about it. Okay, so I like to communicate with people. I'm popular.
Yeah.
Well, in the art world, that can be like a snooty, snooty people can turn on you and say, well, you're not having an exhibit at the national museums because you're a popular artist. So, and Madonna, because she was so hugely popular, people didn't see her as an artist. Wow. They saw her as a pop star. So she still to this day, I think, deals with that annoying thing where, she did make some really good art. Papa Don't Preach.
Yes.
Those are great songs, like that have a meaning and have dimension to them. So same with Keith Haring, like his stuff, because it's so accessible, is easy to dismiss. Yeah. Oh, he's in the pop category and da-da-da-da-da. But then you realize, wait a minute, there's got to be some profound stuff in there for them, him and Madonna to have this incredible enduring appeal, like enduring. Like there are young kids who discover Keith Haring now. They have no idea he's been dead for 40 years.
No idea.
No idea, because his stuff is touching them, communicating them, and they like it. They like how it looks. And Kanye West has the
I love that last chapter, the postmortem. Have you seen Kanye's hair? I love that. And it's true. It's so relevant. And I think it's interesting that push against the establishment sort of came up quite a bit in your book, just about sort of like you mentioned, like the Haring badge, by the way, which I thought was brilliant, just sort of giving people a piece of his artwork, making it affordable, various pieces accessible, and then people looking down on that. But what I think is interesting, and you probably would agree, every time an artist breaks the rules or goes against the establishment, they're actually creating a new form of art that most likely will have that longevity and impact, you know?
Yeah. And then sometimes, like, I think of Jay-Z and Beyonce, obviously stratospherically successful. And both of them, you've seen these moments where they step back and they want to create something more complex.
Yes.
Like Jay-Z did the collaboration with Marina Abramovich.
I loved it. I watched it a million times.
Her Formation album felt like, she wants to add dimension to what she does. So blah, 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 blah. And, I think that's an impulse people have. I like to be popular. I want everyone to hear my music, but then you also want to be taken seriously. And how do you do that? And blah, 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 blah. And I think it's interesting to watch them navigate that very creatively.
And I love the resilience that you highlight. Especially towards the end of his life, there's this part where it's like he finds out he has AIDS and he's just sort of like, most people would do this or that or give up. And you're like, not our Keith. And I was like, yes, I love it. Just that resilience of, you know what? Things seem like they're crashing, but I'm going to keep making art. I'm going to keep making an impact, keep expressing myself. I thought, it was, I had a very challenging day when I read that. And I was like, you're right, Simon. It just lifted my spirits. And I was like, yes, Keith can rise. I can too. And I think there's something to his story that really connects with that.
Well, I think that his book should be read by everyone at high school and college now, because these kids who are now finishing their education are in for a very rough ride. Like I'm very worried about the employment prospects for young people now, as we come out of hopefully this COVID situation. Yes. I'm very worried about it, because when I was a kid, my first job was in a bottle top factory. When I was 16, I left school. I subsequently got back into the education system, but there were jobs that you could get. There were jobs in retail where you could tread water and figure out who you were going to be, how to function. Now these jobs are falling away. And I think it's, so the resilience that Keith Haring showed throughout his formative years, like as an example, there was a particular college he wanted to study at, but he couldn't get in and didn't have the money. So he worked as a janitor in that college, like cleaning toilets, taking out the trash, and taking classes in semiotics.
Ooh, and I felt that.
I think that kind of thinking now, when no one's handing you nothing, no one. And so I think for young people to be, Keith Haring would be somebody good to keep in their sights. Like, he was unstoppable. Yes. He took, how many dishwashing jobs did he take to keep things moving and to pay the rent, pay his expenses and buy art supplies? And I found all that very inspiring, and I relate to it, because at my generation, we were like that, working class kids who wanted to be part of the swinging, groovy situation that's unfolding.
Same here, working for free. Yes. I've done all kinds of jobs, cleaning, everything.
You relate. So I think like his resilience, what you can accomplish if you're not distracted and you're willing to, just do something to pay the rent while you figure out the big stuff or the other stuff or whatever stuff. So yeah, I think what do you think about the prospects for young people? I mean, I think you're a young person too.
Well, thank you. I am a young 35, I guess. I have like 2 children, toddlers.
You do?
I do. I know. It's
Are they muffled in another room where they
they are not here right now. They're giving mommy a break to get some work done, which I appreciate. But they're great.
And how old are they?
2 and 4.
Wow.
I would not be able to do this interview right now if they were here.
See, to me, as a childless 68-year-old, that is truly heroic.
Thank you. One would be literally hanging from my head right now. I'd be like, Simon.
I think child rearing is so noble. Do you know Lauren Mack? She just did a show with my Johnny. They've been working on a show together. And I went to the set and hung out with them both. And she has these 2 kids. And I thought, you got people that do this and that.
Yeah.
To me, I'm so impressed with that.
Thank you.
I take my toupee off
tapping into my Keith Haring, like I'm one of those people, like, driven. I'm like, let's do it. Let's carve out the time. If I have to read the book into the night, I will do so. I just really, really love what I do. I love fashion. I love the people in it. I consider the fashion folks, my fashion family, whether they're functional or dysfunctional, I feel like the passion sort of unites us all. But as it relates to the next generation, I always talk to the younger kids. I'm just like, hey, like, if you want this, you really, really, really have to give it your all. And like you said, the focus is key. So if you have to, I was a hostess, I've, been like, one of those random like servers at private parties, like to make money, like whatever it took, I did what I needed to do so that I could progress and be there. And it's so interesting. One of my first jobs was actually I was an assistant buyer at Bloomingdale's. So that whole retail, Stephanie Solomon. Hey, Stephanie. Well, then she went to Lord & Taylor and then she did her own. So, Stephanie and all of them, like love. So yeah, like and then IMG. So, it's so funny. My old boss is like, Kirsten, I didn't know you were working at Dos Caminos as a hostess. I'm like, yes, nights and weekends so I can pay my rent, So it's like, you just got to do what you have to do. If you love it, give it your all, take the jobs you need to take, so that you can be in the room and learn what you need to learn and be creative and be who you are,
Well said. I mean, Dana and I, we share an obsession with Diana Ross, as everyone does, I hope. And her life, I think she's another hero for me, like Keith Haring, because, there she is in Detroit sewing the costumes.
Wow.
As a teenager for the Supremes herself in the projects, and like making it happen, doing what you have to do, and keeping your. I think that's so. And Mahogany and the whole situation.
Mahogany! Oh my goodness, I love Diana Ross, and it's so funny you mentioned Detroit. I actually had a conversation with Veronica Webb, and she was going. She just. Educated me so much. She was like, I was like, there's so many fashion people who come out of Detroit. Like, why is that? You got Tracy, you got Patrick, like, what's going on here? And she was like, well, you have to remember what came out of Detroit. Detroit had Motown. I said, well, excuse me. She was like, yeah, you could go to the grocery store and run into Berry Gordy. I said, what? So it's like this magical time and this magical place. And just, there's all these things that happen around the nation throughout time that not everyone is privy to. So it's just hearing those stories and the glamour and all the drama and the entertainment. I love it.
Yeah, I'm addicted to that period. I've read lots of books about Berry Gordy and Diana Ross. And it was huge in England, because we didn't have, segregation. So the Black artists would come to England and they loved it because they were just treated properly. Yeah. And so all of the Motown artists were all very popular in England, would tour regularly. And I remember the first time seeing the Supremes on TV and just losing my shit completely.
You're like, who is that?
It's so glamorous. It's so beautiful. And yeah.
I love it.
So, yeah.
Well, this is a fashion moment. And one thing that we ask all of our guests is to just, talk about, and you have a million, but like one of your favorite fashion moments of all time and why. It can be personal, professional, something that you observed, really up to you. It could even be like last week. It's up to you.
Well, you know what just sprang to mind? I'll tell you what just popped into my head. Stella Tennant, the model who just died. There was a moment in the 90s where Yohji Yamamoto used to be one of the big shows of Paris at that point in the 90s. It was Helmut Lang, Alaya, that period of 90s, Jill Sander. And Yohji Yamamoto had this big structured metal runway. And the first model out was Stella Tennant wearing this, it looked like from a distance, a Chanel kind of style suit, but it was all raw edges, with threads dangling down. No one had ever done that before. So taking like a Chanel type suit and having the raggedy edges on it, there was just one of those weird moments where she looked so perfect and it was like, oh my God. And then if you think about raw seams, and that became such a huge thing. And even now we just take it for granted. Yeah. But then it was just this sort of daring, audacious moment of creativity where somebody done something. And it was the fact that it was styled like a kind of Chanel moment was audacious and cheeky. And then with the raw.
I love it.
Raw, like you or I just hacked it with the gardening.
It became a thing. I had no idea that's where it started.
Well, in my mind, that's where it started. But I'm sure like punk maybe used raw seams. But it kind of where it was just a big moment. And also black, the trend for black, which was so dominant in the 90s, Yohji was a big part of that. So that sprang to mind, especially with, Stella Tennant dying recently.
She's so beautiful. One of my favorite models ever.
Strange, sort of androgynous, and she definitely occupied her unique own space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I have to ask, will we be seeing more books on various artists? Is this a part of a series or?
It is part of a series, but other people are doing the other books. They offered me the Haring one because they knew I'd lived in New York at that time and had collaborated with him. And, so, yeah.
Honestly, I don't know if you could partner with the MoMA or something. I just want to hear more. I love your writing. A workshop, a class or something. You're just so knowledgeable about art. And I feel like your perspective is just truly inspirational. And I'm like, I want more. I want a full course. I want a semester, Simon.
Oh, thank you, darling. That's a lovely compliment. One of my secrets is that I stopped drinking in 1980, early 80s.
Wow.
And so I have a great memory. A lot of my friends are like, I can't believe you can remember that Stella Tennant thing and stuff like that. It's all in there. So eventually it'll all go and I'll just be staring into the middle distance like Whistler's mother. You've got me before my Whistler's mother period.
I love it. Well, it has been such a treat chatting with you. I cannot wait to see more of your projects and obviously supporting you on Making It, you and Dana. I'm actually going to text her after we're done, but thank you so much. It's been phenomenal chatting with you.
Well, thank you for having me. And everyone who listens to this should Google Iman Keith Haring jacket, Barney's. So you can see what Iman wearing the jacket that Keith Haring made at Barney's, and her and Madonna are walking down the stairway together.
Oh, the way you described that, it was so magical.
like that body painting he did on Grace Jones, but on a denim jacket. In Miss Iman in her Elia dress with the jacket over the top.
I got chills as I was reading. I was like, oh my, I got just the way you describe her, just sort of like floating in. And I got chills. I really did. I was like, oh my God. So thank you. We'll be adding those to the show notes for sure. I live for this, Simon. I'm having a blast. Thank you so much.
All right, darling. Thank you for having me.
And have a great day.
You too.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now it's time for my favorite segment where we get to hear from you, our listeners, about your favorite fashion moments.
This is Elisa J. Gould from Washington, D.C. A favorite fashion moment that is difficult because there are so many, but a personal one is when the fabulous Pussy Noir invited me to curate a sustainable fashion show at an event at Trade Bar in DC, an LGBTQ bar, and I had to come up with 16 looks using 4 models. So I had 1 male, 3 females. The 16 looks were created with 8 pieces of clothing for all the models. And, well, it was just incredible. So that was one. And I would have to say the second one was, of course, Miss Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, when she goes shopping with the amazing Richard Gere and just transforms her whole look, returns to the original boutique and reminds them to not judge a book by its cover.
Thanks so much for joining me for this week of A Fashion Moment. If you like what you hear, we'd love for you to join our community of listeners and spread the word about the show. We also want to hear from you. Share your favorite fashion moments and dream guests with us by sending an audio clip or email to afashionmomentpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can tag us on Instagram at A Fashion Moment, and you could be featured on next week's episode. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review and let us know what you think. Until then, see you next time for another fashion moment. Podcast production by Rebecca Rashid and John Taylor Williams. Digital media production by Megan Porras.
This recording carries a Creative Commons 4.0 international license. Thanks to Patrick Patricios for their song, Hot Coffee.